The best leaders are not driven by ego or personal agendas. They are simply focused on the mission and how best to accomplish it. Powerful words, right?
Absolutely.
And they're the perfect way to kick off our deep dive today on By the Pages. We're going deep on Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin.
Two former Navy SEALs
Yeah.
who took the lessons of combat, really intense combat, and forged them into leadership principles for really anyone, any team, any industry.
It's a book that I think pulls no punches. It's very direct, and they don't sugarcoat anything. Jocko and Leif argue that leadership is about radical responsibility.
No excuses.
No blame.
Just complete ownership of every outcome.
And they illustrate this with gripping stories from their time in Ramadi, Iraq.
One of the most intense battlefields of the Iraq War.
Yeah, it was a very, very difficult place to be.
Absolutely. And one story that really drives this point home is what they call the blue on blue incident. A really tragic, friendly fire incident happened during a nighttime operation. And instead of pointing fingers, doing what maybe a lot of people would do in that situation, Jocko, he took full responsibility for the failures that contributed to this event, even though he wasn't directly involved.
And this concept of extreme ownership, it goes beyond just taking the blame.
Right.
It's about recognizing that as a leader, you own everything.
Everything.
Your team's wins,
Yep.
their losses.
The whole process.
The entire process, yeah. It's about setting the tone and building a culture of accountability right from the start.
Yeah, and that's where their principle of no bad teams, only bad leaders comes in.
Right.
They argue that a leader's attitude, it's contagious. If you as a leader embrace ownership and you set high standards and you focus on solutions, your team is probably going to follow suit.
They illustrate this with an example from SEAL training. Two failing boat crews that constantly blamed external factors for their poor performance. It was always somebody else's fault.
Always something else, yep.
Never theirs. And the instructors, they decided to do an experiment. They swapped the leaders of those two crews, and suddenly the crew that had been consistently last place started winning.
Yeah, why?
I think the reason is pretty clear.
Because the new leader, he embodied extreme ownership. He instilled discipline, focused on what they could control, and believed in his team's ability to improve.
It's a powerful reminder that if things aren't working, the first place to look is in the mirror.
Yeah.
And ask yourself, what am I doing or not doing as a leader?
Absolutely.
And this leads us to another critical concept they emphasize, decentralized command.
Oh, yeah.
On the battlefield, it's impossible for one person to micromanage every decision.
Right.
SEAL teams, they rely on empowering junior leaders to make decisions in the moment.
In the field, yeah.
On the ground, yeah. And Jocko and Leif, they argue that this principle applies to any organization. Leaders need to trust their team.
Delegate effectively.
Yes.
Provide clear guidance.
Without, and this is key, without dictating every move.
Yeah.
This allows for faster execution.
Agility in the face of challenges.
And it really fosters a sense of ownership at all levels.
They call this communicating the commander's intent, making sure everyone understands the why behind the mission. This empowers individuals to make informed decisions when things are changing quickly, without needing to constantly be asking the boss what to do.
Right. One example they use is a sniper. He's hesitant to take a shot because he's not sure about the target. Rather than forcing a decision, they waited for more information, empowering that sniper to make the best call based on his understanding of the situation as it evolved.
Right. Which really highlights that decentralized command, it doesn't mean a free-for-all.
Yeah.
It still requires trust. It requires clear communication. It requires a shared understanding of the goals.
The objectives, yeah.
Finding the balance between that ultimate responsibility, right?
Yeah.
But also empowering your team to make decisions within their expertise.
And that balance is a theme that really runs through the entire book. It's not about the leader bearing the weight of the world on their shoulders.
Right.
It's about creating an environment where everybody contributes and everybody takes ownership.
And speaking of everybody contributing, that brings us to another principle they draw from their combat experience.
Which is,
cover and move.
On the battlefield, units need to work in sync. They provide cover fire for each other while advancing towards the objective. One team can't move forward unless the others are supporting them.
And Jocko and Leif use this to illustrate the importance of breaking down silos. In any organization, departments, teams, they often operate in isolation, just focused on their own goals, without considering the broader impact on the team, on the company.
They give an example of a manufacturing company struggling with production delays.
Oh, yeah.
And the production manager, he kept blaming the delays on a subsidiary company
Right.
responsible for supplying components.
Yeah.
Classic blame game. But when he applied the cover and move principle, he shifted his perspective.
Instead of pointing fingers, he started working with the subsidiary company to really understand their challenges.
And figure out, okay, what can we do?
How can we support their success?
How can we help you succeed? By breaking down those silos and focusing on shared goals, they were able to improve communication. They streamlined processes and achieved significant gains.
Efficiency went up.
Efficiency went way up. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting how these battlefield principles can be applied to seemingly very different fields. It just shows that leadership challenges are universal. And having a clear framework can be so powerful.
And that clarity of framework is something they really stress, particularly when it comes to communication.
Okay, let's dive into that. They call it simple, clear communication.
Right.
They share stories about simplifying complex military operation plans, focusing on just getting the essence of the information across to the troops who would be executing them. It's about cutting through all the noise and distilling it down to its core message.
And it's not just about being concise, right?
Right.
It's also about being clear. Sometimes that means putting your ego aside and explaining things in a way that anyone can understand. Effective communication means taking the time to check for understanding, to ask for feedback, to make sure that everybody is really on the same page.
Leif recounts a story about a seemingly unnecessary question from higher command during mission planning. Initially, he was frustrated, like, come on, why are we even talking about this right now?
Right.
But he later realized that question was crucial for the commanding officer to understand the situation and then be able to provide effective support.
So it shows communication must flow both ways.
Yeah.
It's not just about leaders pushing information down, but being open to questions and feedback and insights from those who are on the front lines.
Absolutely, yeah. It's about creating a culture where everyone feels comfortable speaking up, asking for clarification, and ensuring that, no matter where you are in the hierarchy, everyone is aligned on the mission.
And this leads to their principle of leading up and down the chain of command. Recognizing that leadership is interconnected at all levels. It's not just about giving orders, it's about fostering open communication and mutual respect throughout the organization.
This means communicating effectively with your superiors, providing them with the information they need, advocating for your team's needs, being receptive to feedback from those above and below you.
They share an example of a mid-level manager who is struggling to implement a new initiative because his superiors just didn't seem to understand what he was dealing with. By proactively communicating those challenges he faced and the impact on his team, he was able to gain support and resources from above, which led to a much more successful outcome.
Yeah, it's about taking ownership of the communication process at all levels, advocating for your team, and just ensuring that everybody is aligned. You don't just assume your superiors understand what you're dealing with. And you don't get frustrated when they ask questions. You see it as an opportunity to educate them and advocate for your team and build that shared understanding.
Exactly. And that proactive communication, it kind of ties back to one of the most powerful and maybe even paradoxical ideas in the book. Discipline equals freedom.
Interesting. Because, we often associate discipline with restriction. Rules, regulations, things that limit our freedom.
Right. But Jocko and Leif argue that discipline in the form of clearly defined standard operating procedures.
SOPs?
Yeah, SOPs actually create freedom of action. They say in the chaos of a SEAL operation, if everybody's just kind of winging it, improvising,
Amping it up as they go along.
it quickly descends into chaos.
Right.
But if everyone's following the same disciplined procedures, it creates predictability, it creates efficiency, and ultimately it creates greater freedom to operate within that structure. They standardized everything from how they looted vehicles to how they cleared rooms. And these procedures, even though they might initially feel restrictive, allowed them to operate faster, adapt to changing situations, and minimize errors.
It's like having a solid foundation for a house. Once that foundation of discipline is in place, you have the freedom to build anything you want on top of it. But without it, you're constantly battling instability, you're battling risk.
And this translates to any team, to any organization. A lack of discipline, a lack of clear processes, consistent communication, all that creates confusion. It creates inefficiency and ultimately a lack of freedom. It's not about being rigid or inflexible.
Right.
It's about creating a framework that allows for creativity and innovation within a structure that promotes excellence.
So it's about finding that sweet spot, right?
Yeah.
Between structure and flexibility, discipline and freedom. And that leads us to another really interesting concept, the dichotomy of leadership.
Ooh, yeah.
This is where Leif and Jocko argue that effective leaders must balance seemingly opposing qualities.
Right. Like a good leader needs to be confident, but not cocky.
Okay, yeah.
Courageous, but not foolhardy.
Right?
Detail-oriented, but not obsessed with minutia. It's about finding that balance between those kind of contradictory traits,
Right, right.
which allows you to lead with strength, with decisiveness, but also be adaptable, empathetic, and open to input.
They illustrate this with an example of a CEO struggling with a difficult decision. He's got two key executives who are in conflict. And instead of choosing sides or forcing them to work together, he makes the really tough call to fire them both
Wow.
and rebuild the team with individuals who are aligned on the mission and committed to collaborating.
That demonstrates decisiveness, even when it's a hard choice. And it highlights the need to align your team around that shared mission, shared values. If there's constant conflict, constant tension, that's a sign that something needs to change. And sometimes that change requires making really difficult calls.
And this leads to another, I think, really crucial aspect of leadership,
Okay.
making decisions amid uncertainty. In the fog of war, just like in business, leaders rarely have all the information they need to make a perfectly informed decision.
Leif tells a story about a sniper who's hesitant to take a shot. He's just not sure about the target. And instead of forcing him to make a decision right then and there, they waited until more information was available, empowering him to make the best call based on his understanding of the situation.
They call this making an educated guess, using your experience, your knowledge, all the information you have available to make the most informed decision you can, even when there's risk involved.
And that's where experience and judgment come into play. The more experience you have, the better equipped you'll be to make those judgments.
Right, so it's like a continuous learning process.
Exactly.
Every decision, every outcome, it gives you a chance to learn, refine your judgment, become a more effective leader.
And this learning process is essential for continuous improvement. The best leaders, they constantly seek feedback, they analyze their decisions, they look for ways to improve their performance. It's not about being perfect, it's about striving for excellence.
Learning from those mistakes.
And constantly evolving as a leader.
That's a powerful takeaway. It really highlights the importance of humility in leadership. It's not about having all the answers. It's about being open to learning, admitting when you're wrong, and seeking ways to improve.
And this humility, coupled with extreme ownership, it creates this foundation, a foundation for trust, a foundation for accountability, which empowers teams to achieve really extraordinary results.
One of the most striking examples of these principles in action comes from their experience in the Battle of Ramadi. The fighting was intense, the stakes were incredibly high, and the environment was chaotic and unpredictable.
Yeah.
They were tasked with training and leading Iraqi soldiers who had a very different level of experience and discipline compared to the SEALs.
Which created a whole new set of challenges for Jocko and Leif.
Absolutely. They had to bridge the cultural divide, instill discipline in a group that wasn't accustomed to it, and build trust in this highly volatile environment.
Not easy.
No, not at all. They're really frustrated at first, by the Iraqi soldiers' lack of discipline, their tendency to kind of cut corners.
Right?
And their resistance to following those standard operating procedures.
Yeah, SOPs.
The SOPs, yeah. It would have been so easy to just write them off.
Yeah.
Dismiss them as incompetent or unmotivated.
But instead of giving up, they took extreme ownership of the situation.
They realized that it was their responsibility to find a way to motivate and train these soldiers, instill the discipline that was necessary to succeed in combat.
They did this by focusing on the why, explaining the importance of each task, setting clear expectations, and holding the Iraqi soldiers accountable for their actions.
It was a slow process, often very frustrating.
Yeah.
But they started to see a shift in the Iraqi soldiers' attitude and their performance. They started to take more ownership of their roles, follow those procedures more diligently, and just demonstrate greater discipline.
Which, in turn, led to more trust between the SEALs and the Iraqi soldiers, ultimately contributing to their success in the Battle of Ramadi. It's a powerful example of how leadership can transcend cultural barriers, how discipline can be cultivated, and how trust can be built even in the most challenging environments.
And it really emphasizes the book's core message. Extreme ownership is not just a concept, it's a mindset. It's a commitment to taking responsibility for your actions, your team's performance, and the outcomes you're trying to achieve.
And one of the most powerful tools for fostering that mindset, for developing effective leaders, is what they call the debrief.
The debrief, okay.
The debrief is so critical. It's a process for learning, analyzing performance, identifying areas for improvement. It's something they carried over from their SEAL training, where after every mission, they would gather the team to discuss what went well, what went wrong, and how they could improve next time.
And it's not about pointing fingers or dwelling on mistakes.
Right?
It's about creating a culture of accountability, of continuous improvement, and of learning from every single experience.
And they emphasize that the debrief should be conducted constructively and objectively. You're focusing on identifying specific actions that can be taken to improve future performance.
So it's about asking questions like, what went well? What could have been done better?
What did we learn?
Yeah,
And how can we apply these lessons moving forward?
exactly, yeah. How can we improve our performance next time?
They share this story about a mission that, well, let's just say it went sideways. A series of mistakes that led to this near catastrophic outcome. But instead of just brushing it under the rug, they conducted this really thorough debrief, identified those root causes, and came up with specific actions to prevent those things from happening again.
This commitment to honest self-assessment,
Yeah.
to identifying your weaknesses and addressing them head-on. It's a hallmark of extreme ownership and a critical component of building a high-performing team.
If you're not willing to acknowledge your mistakes, learn from them, make adjustments.
You're going to keep repeating them.
You're doomed to repeat them. And that's just passing the buck, avoiding responsibility, and setting yourself up for failure.
Extreme ownership is about taking responsibility for everything, the good, the bad, the ugly, and then using that responsibility as fuel for continuous improvement.
And it's this relentless pursuit of excellence, this unwavering commitment to learning and growing that separates the best leaders from the rest.
Now, one of the most common challenges that leaders face is dealing with difficult people.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the inevitable clash of personalities, clash of egos, people resisting change.
It happens all the time.
It happens all the time, yeah.
Yeah.
Jocko tells a story about a challenging SEAL he encountered in Ramadi. This guy was highly skilled, but also very arrogant, disregarding orders, undermining team cohesion.
Not a good combination.
No, not a good combination at all. And they knew that ignoring the problem would only make it worse.
Right.
They understood that it was their responsibility to address the issue head on, hold him accountable,
Yeah.
and try to help him become a more effective team member.
So how did they do that?
They did this through direct and honest conversations, clearly communicating the expectations and outlining the consequences if he continued that disruptive behavior.
Laying down the law.
Yeah, laying down the law. But they also made a point of recognizing his strengths and his skills and contributions when he performed well. It was a delicate balance, but ultimately it worked.
You came around?
Yeah, he started to understand the impact of his actions, took more responsibility, and gradually became a valuable and respected member of the unit.
It shows that effective leadership can transform even those really challenging individuals.
Right.
It's about discipline. It's about building trust. It's about leading by example, even in those tough situations. And it really highlights that leadership is not about being liked.
Right.
It's about doing what's right for the team, even when it's hard.
Exactly. It's about having the courage to have those tough conversations, holding people accountable, creating that culture of excellence where everyone strives to be their best. And sometimes that requires, making those difficult choices, letting go of people who, while they may be talented, they just don't contribute to the team's success.
And that brings us back to a point we've touched on throughout this whole deep dive.
Yeah.
That importance of prioritizing the mission above all else. Jocko and Leif, they consistently emphasize that ego and personal agendas have no place in effective leadership.
It just gets in the way.
It clouds your judgment.
Yeah.
They argue that true leaders, they focus on the objective, on what needs to be accomplished, and on empowering their team to get it done, even if it means making personal sacrifices or unpopular decisions along the way.
One story that I think really illustrates this is when Jocko had to make a tough call during a mission in Ramadi.
Oh, yeah, I remember this one.
He was faced with a situation where one of his SEALs was severely wounded and the mission was in jeopardy.
So what did he do?
The instinct in that moment might be to try and save that wounded SEAL at all costs.
Right.
But Jocko realized that doing so would put the entire team at risk, and it would jeopardize the mission objective. So he made this really agonizing decision to leave the wounded SEAL behind, knowing that was the only way to ensure the safety of the rest of the team and the success of the mission. It was a heartbreaking choice.
Absolutely.
But it was a choice that was driven by the mission. not by emotion, not by personal attachment.
It speaks to the level of commitment and selflessness that they believe is at the core of true leadership.
Yeah.
Putting the mission first, even when it means making those sacrifices that go against your natural instincts. Having the courage to make those tough calls, even when they're not popular, and to live with those consequences.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into extreme ownership, I think the key takeaway for me is that leadership is a choice. It's a choice to take responsibility, to lead with courage, and to empower your team to achieve greatness, no matter what challenges they're facing.
It's about embracing these principles that Jocko and Leif lay out so clearly.
Yeah.
Taking ownership, communicating clearly, leading up and down the chain of command, fostering that discipline that creates freedom. If you're ready to take that step, to elevate your leadership and achieve those extraordinary results, we highly encourage you to pick up a copy of Extreme Ownership. You'll find a link to the book in the episode description.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive, we'd love for you to like and subscribe to By the Pages so you don't miss our future episodes.
Until next time, keep learning, keep leading, and keep owning it.
Thanks for listening.